Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Joe Biden's stimulus package is set to become law. And we've got to look at, is it really that good? Or is it pretty bad? And maybe it's somewhere in between. There's a lot of money being allocated here, almost $2 trillion. And we, the people of the United States, are going to have to pay it back. If we're going to use that type of money, it's important that we look at how it's being used and do we feel it's being used effectively. So today, we're going to break down the key points of the legislation as it stands currently and also look at the big question of spending, because undoubtedly, you have heard from two different sides, from the Democrats that it is absolutely necessary to spend this much money, and from Republicans, you've heard the cries of fiscal responsibility that seem to be absent for the past 4 years or so, but nonetheless might be valid concerns. So what's the real situation there? Well, we're going to look at that and more, but of course, we couldn't begin a conversation on COVID relief without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Glad you pointed that out, that over the last 4 years, the Republicans have not been concerned at all about the rising debt. And now that they're no longer in power, all of a sudden they're going to take fiscal responsibility as an issue. So it's nice to see where their bread is buttered. When they're in charge, we can spend all the money we want. When they're not, then we're going to cry we're spending too much money. But since we're going to talk about a stimulus package, I thought the word stimulus, which we hear all the time, might be a good word of the day. So stimulus, S-T-I-M-U-L-U-S, is a noun. The first definition is something that rouses or incites to action or increased action and incentive.
One of the reasons that I wanted to choose a New York Times piece for this is because you figured for those people that feel that the New York Times has a leftward lean, it would be interesting to get their take on what the Democrats' key points are here in this COVID relief, $1.9 trillion pandemic relief package, rather. And the headline is this: the $1.9 trillion pandemic relief package moving through Congress advances an idea that Democrats have been nurturing for decades: establishing a guaranteed income for families with children. The reason I thought this was interesting, Lance, is when you think about, if I took a random poll of people, right, and said, which party is more focused on pushing family, right? And that's all I said. We didn't get into the weeds necessarily. I think that a lot of people, right, wrong, or otherwise, would say, well, the Republicans are focused on that, right? I mean, when you think of the thing that comes to mind for me is traditional family values and the traditional family unit and that kind of thing, right? I mean, that is a very typical mantra of the party, or at least it used to be. And so when the headline is that Democrats have been nurturing this idea for decades of establishing a guaranteed income for families with children, it almost seems like that flies counter to what we've been led to believe about the parties. So what are we missing there, Lance? I mean, why is this something that's so important to Democrats? Because basically what they're doing, right, is, depending on how you look at it, essentially, Democrats are on the verge of a congressional package that would provide most parents a monthly check of up to $300 per child. I mean, yes, it's going to be chalked up and branded differently and how it's delivered and how you apply for it. But at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. And that's according to the New York Times, right? This isn't Fox News or something. I'm telling you from a supposedly left-leaning source that the bottom line, according to them, is that Democrats will provide most parents a monthly check of up to $300 per child. In other words, a basic income for those that have children, right? Or at least basic income for the children, theoretically. So why is this component so important to Democrats?
Well, I should have picked a different word of the day. It sounds like with your opening here, should have picked the word family. But all family is people living in the same house or household. That's what it is. Now, what you're saying is that when
families
we
with
say
children.
the word Well, that would be all the people living in the same household. So it would include grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews, all of that. I mean, it would, when we look at just the word family, but I think the key point here that you're trying to make is that for each of us, that connotation of that word is so different. And the Democrats here, for them, family has multiple meanings, as we've talked about on this show, looking at millennials not having children and not having enough people to provide workers to pay for Social Security in the future and just workers to do jobs. We also look at young people looking at different ways to have children. Maybe they don't want to get married, but they still want to raise children. They still think they can do a good job. Or you have couples who maybe physically can't have children, but they want to use eggs and sperms from somebody else to produce a child to raise and take care of. And the Democrats are saying in this big umbrella, well, that's our definition of family. And so any older person who is taking care of children deserves to have some money to help take care of them, which is why the Democrats are doing this. When you say that, well, this sounds like something the Republicans would want. And it's going to be tough for the Republicans because we've seen with divorce, the number of single parents raising children, people who tried to get married, and it didn't work out. And now they have children to take care of. A lot of them vote Republican. So this is going to be an interesting dynamic to see how the Republicans challenge this, because they could cut off their nose to spite their face, so to speak, because many of their supporters are these same people that are hurting in tough financial times, trying to raise children by themselves.
Well, I think it's a good point about the child tax credit, Lance. At the end of the day, it's a bigger conversation, and we may have to do an episode just on the child tax credit, but we wanted to mention it because obviously it's a signature piece of this legislation that's not being talked about, and it's one that we didn't really get to dive into very much in the first episode that we covered this on, but we'd encourage people to go back and listen to that. But what else is different? Because you've got the episode where you can listen to the full detail, and we'd encourage you to do that at thestateofus.org. You go there, go back and listen to the other episode. But what did the Senate change? So how is the bill now different? Notably, there's just a couple of things. The minimum wage increase was dropped. Of course, this is the big one that you've probably heard about. Basically, the parliamentarian said, nope, you can't do that with reconciliation. So that's got to go. So that was dropped. Stimulus checks will be available to fewer Americans. Both the House and Senate bills provide another round of direct payments to Americans, with payments of up to $1,400 going to hundreds of millions of people. The Senate bill, however, places stricter income limits on who is eligible, which disqualifies millions of people from receiving a payment. This was in an effort, obviously, to curb that criticism of the first bill, Lance, of you're sending all this money to people that don't need the money. Unemployment payments would remain at $300 per week instead of increasing to $400 a week. That was a fight last year, and that's one that the Senate did change. The Senate's bill drops a rail project and adds a provision about student loan debt. The two bills are different in a variety of areas, but ultimately the Senate added a provision that would exempt student loan forgiveness from income taxes through 2025, because when a loan is forgiven, for people that don't know the particulars of this, you then have to count it as income, generally speaking, right? So because it's not something, you don't have to pay that money back. You were given that money, it's your income. So it at least temporarily exempts student loans through 2025. What happens after that? Well, we'll see. And the rail project in Silicon Valley that was in Northern California, which was criticized by Republicans, was subsequently dropped by the Senate because the parliamentarians said, no, that's not part of budget reconciliation. That's a new piece of legislation. I would have hoped the parliamentarian, and I know the parliamentarian can't do this, but we dropped it because it's not related, or at least not to the original legislation. It's one of those, it got hung on there. Doesn't mean it's not a good idea. Just means that it was added, and they dropped this stuff, Lance, right? Because they want to pass it. I mean, that's at the end of the day, It's more about passing it than it is about getting all this done.
Well, of course, that's part of, I guess that's part of the negotiations, is that there are things you have to do and you have to work and give and take. But the bottom line is, even with all that negotiations, none of the Republicans voted for it. So that's where it's like, okay, why do any of it? That's the other side of this question, correct? Is that, okay, we had some negotiations, we took some things out of it, we tweaked it a little bit, and yet none of the Republicans voted for it anyway. So if you're the Democrats, then why not just go for what you want and do what, that's the argument, correct? Is that, well, we tried to work with you and you're not going to vote for it anyway. So you leave us, what's the benefit of me working with you if I can't gain your support, or at least some of your support? Obviously, it's not going to go 100-0, but that's my takeaway here is like, okay, we offered to help. We tried to go along with some of the things that you said. We made some tweaks to it here, and you're still not going to support it. So then when it comes up the next time and we have something and you want us to listen to you, well, you make me want to say, why should I listen to you? And that's not good government. On either side, this isn't, as you've said many times, it's not Republican or Democrat, but it's, if we have a discussion and we have negotiations and we change some things and then you don't vote for it anyway, well, then why would I bother to listen to you the next time we have to have a discussion? And that's heartbreaking to me. Just on either side. It's not Republican, or it's not that no Republicans supported any of the Democratic idea, or, Democrats don't support any of the Republican idea. It's like, okay, you have the negotiations and then none of you can come over and support it and make it a bipartisan situation. That's what I find disheartening.
Negotiations not only are disheartening, but they cost us money. And that's what we're talking about coming up is Biden's plan good or bad? Well, part of that we have to look at, right, is it a responsible use of money? You've obviously heard Republicans say it isn't. No surprise there. You've obviously heard Democrats say it is. No surprise there. What's the reality? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
There is a lot in the new $1.9 trillion stimulus package that has become one of Biden's signature pieces of legislation during the early days of his presidency. But the question comes, and of course the Republicans, as we all knew they would, right, have raised questions about if this is a smart use of money. And assuredly, it didn't pass with a single Republican vote in the Senate. So obviously, Republicans have some objections to this. I do want to put this caveat in there, and I was hoping that we'd mention it in the first segment of, I think part of what you're going to find today, with the exception maybe of the thing that we talked about in the first segment, ironically, which is that child, quote unquote, tax credit, right? $300 possibly monthly for parents that have children or guardians that have a child. With the exception of that, the rest of this is mostly politics as usual. And what I mean by that is the reason that Republicans are opposing this is not necessarily because they disagree with everything that's in it, and not necessarily because they think it's a bad use of money. They are opposing it because they know that strategically their best chance of winning in the midterms is being as obstructionist as possible to the agenda of the Democrats. And this is not a Republican-specific tactic, folks, just to be clear, right? Part of the reason that when we say, what did Trump get done in his first 2 years when he had control of both chambers is because the Democrats practiced the same obstructionist mindset. And lo and behold, what happened? In the midterms, they won back control of the House. And in the last presidential election, they won back control of the White House and the Senate. So it works, which is part of why the parties do it. But understanding that I'm sure there are, as Lance pointed out, There are a number of Republicans that think the child tax credit is probably a smart idea, and it's probably not the only thing in the legislation that they think is a smart idea. There's about, as of October 1st of 2020, which is the most recent data available, about $800 billion of already appropriated funds, money that Congress has said is available, that has not been promised to anybody and has not been used. So the question is, do we really need a full 1.9 trillion, or do we need just 1.1 trillion and to reallocate that 800 billion that hasn't yet been used?
But where is the 800 billion that hasn't been spent already? Where is it allocated currently? I mean, is it in a place that people will want to use it here in a little bit, or have people just not applied for it because they don't know it exists? I mean, I think it's in, is it in the small business loans in those areas? Do we, where is that money? I think it's easy to say there's $800 billion available. Okay. But what fund is it in? Who hasn't used it yet?
Well, the Paycheck Protection Program and healthcare enactment accounts for one of the single largest portions. There is $106 billion from that law that is unused, of which there is $94 billion from loan account spending, which this gets a little this would get a little into the weeds for people. But the bottom line is basically from the PPP Act, there is $106 billion that is unused, and from the other large portion is the rest of it comes from the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, more commonly known as the CARES Act. There is $691 billion in that one that is unused.
And there's nothing, and has everybody had time who would have been able to use this money? I guess I'm asking a question as a listener, in this case. It's I mean, that makes sense, right? If we have $800 billion that we set aside that nobody claimed to use, then obviously it makes sense to take that and let's use it over here. It's like if I set aside X amount of, if I set aside $10,000 to pay my property taxes, and my property tax this year was only $4,000, well, I've got an extra $6,000. I'm not going to let it sit there in the property tax fund. I'm going to move it somewhere else where it can do me some good. So your rationale makes sense to, let's not go for 1.9 new money. Let's go for 1.1 and allocate the extra 800 billion that hasn't been used, if everybody's had an opportunity to use from it. I guess that's my question as a listener here.
Well, so the CARES Act was enacted March 27th of 2020, and the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enactment Act was April 24th of 2020. So, I mean, I guess to answer your question, the rollout obviously was not seamless. We went through that process for our business. So it was not seamless. It was not simple, but I would say generally at this point, at least from what it seems like, most people that have tried to make use of that or that wanted to probably have. Now, I will say, though, on the other side of that, anecdotally, I got a call just the other day from a local business owner I know that was saying, hey, you're pretty familiar with grants and other stuff that's available. Is there anything? Here's what I've already applied for. Is there anything that I'm missing? And I said, well, yeah, actually, here's one thing. Here's one of the programs that the government funded that is available that you just said you haven't made use of. So you might want to look into that, because I know it's one of the lesser ones. It's the EIDL grants that are available, which stands for Economic Insurance Disaster Loan, I think. EIDL, something like that. And they had a grant program where you could basically receive $1,000 for each employee, air quotes there, up to 10,000. And this person hadn't made use of that. I guess I'm not sure that we have a definitive answer to that, which is why I guess the mixed response from me would be, it seems like what would have made the most sense, just without getting down into the specifics of it, if you love everything that's in Biden's plan, let's look at how much of, because Biden's plan builds on some of these programs that haven't used all their money, right? So let's at least, at a bare minimum, let's at least not add all that money to it. Let's figure out, how much of what is already unallocated can we can we just keep allocated to those things and maybe do a better job of promoting them? Because again, there's obviously people out there that would use them that haven't yet, maybe because they don't know or don't understand or didn't need it yet, whatever. So I guess, I don't know. I'm sorry, that's not a super clear answer, Lance. I guess what I'm saying is, I wish they would. I wish they had a better answer to it. I wish our lawmakers had a better answer.
Right. Well, the other side is if we don't spend it, then it is still there.
Right.
Then we can take it. We can take it back and apply it to the budget in someplace else. But my other point is, what are the Republicans upset about? The $15 minimum wage is not in there. They were successful in saying, okay, we're going to cap the stimulus payment, which is the one that gets all the news. We're going to cap the stimulus payment basically at $160,000 per household, $75,000 for an individual, 160. If you make more than 160, we're not going to give you any stimulus money, which is a change from the first one that was under President Trump's plan. So it would appear to me that there are many that what is it that the Republicans don't like about this, other than the fact that you just said, well, we can't do something that might look good. And again, we all know that in the midterms, the Republicans are going to make gains. I mean, that's a typical thing that happens. It doesn't matter who the president is, that they have trouble holding on.
The opposing party.
The opposing party always makes gains in the midterm. But what are you going to argue against the stimulus bill when most of the people who voted for you got money from it? When most of the people who voted for you have children and are going to, I mean, how are you going to campaign against this? And so why vote against it? Because if I'm going to run against you, if I'm a sitting Republican and I get my Democratic challenger, I'm going to say, well, your Republican senator was against giving you stimulus package when you were out of work. They were against including your $300 for unemployment insurance. They were against you having your home taken. They were all right with you being kicked out of your apartment. They didn't want to give you $300 extra, which meant you could buy $75 worth of food for your teenage boy, which I'm not sure that would even, I mean, it's a good supplement, but I'm not even sure that would cover what a teenage boy could eat. So yeah, they voted against all of that for you. How do you defend that if you're a Republican running for re-election, either as a senator or a House member? Because they've all voted against it. This just seems like something that doesn't do them any good to vote against, other than I understand your argument that if you oppose it, that's good for the upcoming elections. But this seems like it could be some really good attack ads for Democrats that wanted to run against some Republicans that are in iffy situations. Because you're voting against you're voting against the people. You're not voting against big corporate America. You're not voting against the people that everybody, it's easy to dislike those people. You know what I'm saying? I mean, well, we don't like the Wall Street bankers. We don't like this. We don't like that. But you're going to vote against that working mom and dad who are trying to raise their family?
I think so. I think you highlighted a lot of yes, if I'm advising Democrats, absolutely you're going to lay into them. For example, though, the stimulus payments we know have broad bipartisan support. I mean, President Trump himself advocated for $2,000 payments, right? So, I mean, it's not like this is a one-sided thing.
I mean, isn't it 75 or 80% of the American people think this is a good idea?
Yeah.
So why would you vote against it if you're a Republican? That's what I don't get. And I'm sorry, I interrupted you. So complete your answer.
No. But that's the point, right? Why would you? Well, you do it for strategic reasons. The thing that frustrates me the most about this is the talking out of both sides, right? Because when they were advocating for it, for the most part, there were some oppositions. I don't want to say that every Republican fell in line because that's not true. They didn't. There were some that held out and said, no, we don't think that direct stimulus payments are a good idea. And in fact, the State of Us has done an episode that sheds light on, at the end of the day, this is probably not the best way to spend the money. But to Lance's point, 70 to 80% of the American people want it. Doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, but it does mean it's awful hard to say that, when you go to an election year, that this is not going to be used against you. So it is just it's the politics, game of, well, when I was the one suggesting it, it's a good idea. When somebody else suggests it, it's not a good idea anymore. And again, that's not a Republican specific thing. I mean, that's what the Democrats do when it's the other way around. This is just, it's unfortunate. And that's the thing that frustrates me, because they advocated for direct payments and they advocated for a lot of these things. Now, in the defense of Democrats, though, some of these things they've tweaked, like the stimulus payments having a lower top cap. In other words, not sending money to these people that they just probably really don't need the stimulus check, right? Right. And that was the one thing I didn't mention. I guess I forgot to mention at the end of the first segment that I thought was important just to share with people was that would be the one thing on the child tax credit before just saying, let's just do it and give this money out. Not that I don't think, that children should have the money, but similar to the stimulus payments thing, and I'm not advocating here, I'm just saying, I don't know. I'm not sure where I'm at on that. Should every parent get one of these $300 check? I mean, if I make $2 million a year, should I really get this $300 check to help take care of my child? I don't know. I'm not sure that most Americans would be comfortable with that, so sometimes we have to come back and revise these things because we do them in the moment in an effort to get them through. And then we realize, there were some things there that maybe we didn't think through. Like, why would we send $1,400 checks to people whose income hasn't been impacted by the pandemic? To stimulate the economy is the answer, by the way. But since that's not been shown to really work, again, that's why it's been changed in this version of the bill. So something to think about for folks is, what is there to oppose here? Where do you stand on it? We'd love to hear. Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org, podcast@thestateofus.org. Do you like Biden's stimulus plan? Do you think it is a good plan? Because that's what we're answering in the next segment. Is it good? Is it bad on the whole? Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Willer.
So far, we've looked at one of the signature pieces that nobody's talking about in the bill, which is the expansion, quote unquote, expansion of the child tax credit. And we've also talked about, is this a good use of money? As we highlighted, there's almost $800 billion as of October of 2020, last year, that has not been promised or outlaid to entities yet. That's from previous COVID relief bills. So we got $1.9 trillion on the way. Should we just slash it down to $1.1 trillion and say, let's just keep, let's not add all this extra money to these programs that haven't used the money that was originally allocated? It's a little more complicated than that, obviously, but on a surface level, that seems to be it feels like if the Democrats did that, Lance, I guess I would be really interested then to see what the Republicans' response would be, because that's been their chief, fighting point has been, we got all this money that we haven't used yet, so why do we need more? And it's like, okay, fine, we'll drop it to 1.1 trillion and we will proportionally, drop in the places where there's still money to get down to the 1.1 trillion, so that the 1.1 trillion is only new money from programs that need the additional funding or the new programs. And then see, so now what don't you like? I mean, I don't know. From a strategy standpoint, it seems like the Democrats could have had an easy win there to maybe force some Republicans on board, but maybe there's something that we're missing. I don't
understand it either. I've already made it clear. I don't understand what you gain as a Republican, if you gain enough as a Republican to be against this, other than just to say, well, it's just too much money. Because then if it is, then why not bring up what you said, in that 800,000. And then I just want to, again, but let's talk about very quickly, if I'm reading this correctly, it says for the child tax credit under current law, that starts at an adjusted gross income at $15,000. But the bill would make the full value credit available to households making up to $125,000. So it's not going to just everybody. There is a cap on it.
There is a top end.
And it says under current law, the credit is not further reduced below 20% regardless of income. But the proposed law would begin to reduce the credit below 20% for households with income of more than $400,000. So it's not it's not going to everybody. They are trying to hit like they are with capping the stimulus. They're trying to send it to the people that need it the most. So I don't know. I understand you have to have politics, but I guess I'm still pie in the sky, hoping that one of these days we'll sit down and have a discussion on, okay, what's best for the country? Because like you pointed out, 80% of the people, one of the things they said was, everybody wants this. And you said, but that doesn't make it a good idea. Exactly. So why not have that debate? Is this what we need right now? I'm not saying we don't, but we didn't have a debate on whether we should or not. It was just like, yes, we do. No, we don't. Well, that's not a debate. Talk about, well, what's your plan? How are we going to get the economy back up on its feet? How are we going to take care of these people that are in these industries where their jobs have not come back and don't look like they're going to come back anytime soon? It's true. We don't need help in every industry. There are some industries that are doing very well. Teachers are still getting paid. Firemen are still getting paid. Police officers are still getting paid. Nurses and doctors are still getting paid. But then you have, people in the arts and in entertainment and in travel who aren't getting hospitality, who aren't getting paid. So why aren't we having that discussion and say, okay, we need to direct the money if there is going to be money available, because there's that discussion. If we're going to provide money, who are we going to provide it to? Who are the people that are truly in need? And we didn't have that debate. And I'm not saying that I think this is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm saying I miss that debate of let's talk about what some of our options are. And that's what we need to have. I mean, that's what we're doing. You and I are doing here today. We're debating this. We haven't even decided whether it's necessarily good or bad, but we're having a debate over the issues that are in it, just raising the questions. And some of the questions we can answer and some of them we can't. But that's what we should expect out of our politicians. Let's have the debate. Let's have this discussion over what's good and what's bad, what's needed, what's not needed. Not, yeah, we're for this. Well, we're against it because you're for it. That's no way to run a country.
I would add more if there was more to add, but I guess that's exactly what I was thinking as you were speaking, Lance, when you said, I guess there has to be politics. And that was my exact thought. Why? Why does there have to be? Why can't we just do what we're doing right here and say, no, look, here's things that that nobody's talking about, or almost nobody, which is the child tax credit, which arguably might be the single biggest thing of the entire package. I mean, the most notable long-term impact, right? I'm not talking about in terms of money or whatever. It is a substantive portion of money, but $100 billion relative to some of the other programs is not that much money.
But it's $100 billion a year. How much are we spending on military spending? How much are we spending? I mean, that's not even one airplane, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even one fighter jet. And I'm not saying that stuff's not important, but I know $100 billion to most of us. I mean, like you said, we could add up probably a lot of our listeners, and not come up with $100 billion that they've earned in income. But in the budget of the United States government, that's not a lot of money.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, to your point, the U.S. spent $750 billion on the military in 2020. So, $100 billion is obviously,
and all of it's necessary. I just picked that one because that's the one everybody talks about.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying we're overspending on our military because those people that do that job, God bless them. And I'm all for anything that they get. Sometimes I'm worried again, for the same reason, we don't give it to the people who need it in the military. You have military families who are struggling. You have veterans who are struggling with healthcare and mental health care, and we're not spending the money there. That's where it's not that we're not spending enough money in these areas. Are we targeting it to the people who actually need it, who actually would benefit from the money? So I'm not begrudging anything spent for the military, but I would only then have the debate. Okay, where should we be spending it? Well, we should be spending it on the people who are doing the job, on the people who are coming back home and need help from the military. That's where we should be spending the money. Same thing here with the stimulus bill. I'm not against spending the money, but let's target it to the people who are the most in need, who are going to benefit the most from it. That's where the discussion should be.
And so the bottom line for me, I guess, is, and I said this before when we talked about the specifics of the plan, right? We kind of went through each thing. The thing that we didn't talk about a lot at the time was the child tax credit. The bottom line for me, Lance, is it a good or bad plan? I'd say it's an okay plan. I wish that we had a political environment where we could have a better plan, because I know there are better plans to be had out there. I mean, Lance and I just outlined, we're two people, and we've got 535 federally elected, or 536 federally elected representatives, and 536 people who, many of whom are Harvard and Yale graduates, couldn't come up with what Lance and I came up with in, 38 minutes or something. I mean, seriously, what are we getting for the 110,000+ that we're paying these lawmakers every year, 180,000? I mean, are we really getting our money's worth when this is all we get? And so I guess that's to say, I think we got to do something, right? And this is something. And I think there's a lot of things in it that are good. At the same time, I don't want anybody to be under the illusion that this is the best we can do, because that's just, if this is the best we can do, that's pretty sad. There's a lot better that could be done. There's some very encouraging things in it. There's a lot of things in it, though, that are politics as usual from both sides. Like Lance said, there's a lot of people saying, no, it's bad because it's too much money. And there's a lot of people saying, yes, it's good because it's a lot of money. And it's like, that's just, that should not be the barometer by which we're determining if it's good or bad. So that's where I'm at, Lance. I don't know. Final words from you.
No, I mean, I've pretty much said what I wanted to say. I think obviously there are people in need. Have we addressed some of those issues? I think so. Could we have done a better job? Most definitely. I think that I'll just leave it with that.
And that's what we're trying to do here on this show, is have those conversations. To your point, I mean, you mentioned that earlier in this segment, is like, look, why does it have to be this way? Why can't we just do what we did here? And wouldn't we all be better off if we did? So, and that speaks to our mission, right? I mean, that's what we're all about, is hopefully
it sure does.
Fostering these kinds of things.
Well, and that's what we're trying to do here, as you say, at True Chat. That is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've done that. I mean, and again, we haven't mentioned it, but we always like to hear from you, the listener. And so if there's something we've missed, or a part of this that you want to have something to say that you would broaden our horizons and we can learn from you, we're welcome to that input. But if you're listening to this and you'd like to share it with your family and friends, and it starts a conversation, tell them, hey, they can listen to us anytime on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is both a syndicated radio show and a podcast. So you can get new episodes of the podcast Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. Eastern. And of course, the syndicated radio program is heard on the weekends around the nation. So check your local talk market, see if they carry our show. If they don't, please call them up and tell them they should. And a reminder, we'd love to hear from you, right? Email podcast@thestateofus.org, podcast@thestateofus.org. What do you make of everything? Let us know. We take time to read each and every one of them. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our recording producer, Devin McCain, editing producer, Bradley Butch. Thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.